Greetings, YouTube. Today I'll be looking at the player's guide to Skybourne and a technological supplement for this same setting. And I'm just going to read a little blurb in here, which I think it really does sum up the setting quite succinctly. Skybourne is an adventure setting placed on and above the world of Crone at the closing of one era and the beginning of another. And I just realized I had my headphones in. Sorry about that. When the walkways that joined the plains shattered, it caused the great forest to grow, destroying everything that had come before it. Millennium of civilization was irrevocably lost as the entire surface world was consumed. Some fled to the ocean, escaping the destruction on tattered boats. Some fled to the mountaintops, the deserts, and the frozen wastelands, finding refuge in terrain where not even the forest could grow. Some even have fled across the plain boundaries, huddling as refugees in strange and foreign worlds, and others took to the skies, transplanting towns, cities, kingdoms to the clouds where not even the forest could reach. Crone is a world where adventurers are the first and last line of defense of a host of emerging cultures, where the battles of law and chaos are just as important as the battles of good and evil, and where whole worlds worth of lost wonders can be found. In Skybourne, the old world has passed, and the new world could belong to anyone. They have the strength to take it. So, essentially, you had a high fantasy setting with a lot of connections to many other planes, like many high fantasy settings, and those connections were broken. Didn't specify how. Doesn't really matter. That could be something the campaign discovers, or it could always remain a mystery. Sometimes life needs a little mystery. And as the backlash to this, what had been the primordial forests of the world just exploded across the land. Till now, the entire continent, every square inch of landmass on the continents is completely covered in the forest. I don't know if it also covers all the islands. Maybe there are isolated islands that weren't affected by this. Who knows? But people tried to escape, and they escaped to the oceans, so there'd be very kind of water world colonies floating out there. The aquatic races, of course, have now flourished because their world was not affected by this, except for the loss of planar connections. Some fled to mountaintops, some, because the campaign setting is called Skybourne, took to the air, lifting entire settlements and creating airships. I imagine the airship technology probably existed prior to this, because I don't think that's the kind of thing you want to bootstrap as the forest is growing across the planet. And that's a really interesting idea. Okay? Now, the setting isn't, this is like 108 or 9 pages. It's a very dense book, however, both physically and content-wise. Full color, nice quality pages, and they give you a lot of different types of races to play in here, like the Aasimar, who have wings, the plant-like Alron, the Caecilia, which are kind of squid merpeople, which I think is very cool, who are actually aquatic. Then we have a dinosaur-style race. There we go, dinosaur-style race. And the illustrations in here are very solid. They definitely do the job. But the cover, I think, is probably the best. It's the most attractive piece of art. And they have a race in here called the Created, which are freaky, because it's essentially you start off as a torso with arms, and then you get creation points, which you can then use to become anything you want. There's all kinds of flexible options in here for this race, like adding legs, an additional head, more arms, natural attacks, fins, wings, the burrow speed, quirks, a climber. And because this is set up this way, it would be very easy for someone a player and a GM, to come up with some unusual features. I imagine Gamma World would be very inspirational for this race. So you can come up with some very strange construct type races here. There is a small dragon-like race that aspire to become dragons. They consider it their heritage. They also touch on the classic races for D&D and how they may have slight differences in here. For example, some of the elves have given themselves over to the forest, and some have fled into the sky in the Elfwood, which is a flying forest, essentially. So there's a division between the elves. Some have gone to what some people view as chaos into the forest, and become the defenders thereof, while others are aligning themselves with law and are now flying in the air or in the oceans and things like that. They have a very interesting race in here. Oops, very interesting race, which are essentially they're phoenixes, and you can buy abilities that when you die you get reborn, which is really bloody cool. But it's kind of interesting to play a character that is a giant bird, not a huge. I mean, it's like medium size, I think. Then we have gnomes, which have essentially given themselves over to the forest. They talk about halflings. I have something on my phone. Then we have a race of tree people, which are actually kind of dwarf-like in their build and such. They talk about the merfolk because they're going to be very powerful. A race of fairy-like creatures, right there. So there's a lot of races available in here. Oh, this is good. This is essentially the Thrycreen from third edition or D&D, and a Pathfinder version thereof. So that's kind of cool. Then there are all kinds of player options in here as far as your classes are concerned, different kinds of magic. This supplement discusses the Spheres of Power, which is an alternative magic system for Pathfinder. I actually don't own a copy, so I can't speak of any kind of authority on that. But this is also talking about the Pathfinder core and base classes, so you're good if you don't have the Spheres of Power. But if you do have the Spheres of Power and you like that, this book incorporates that content into the setting. They talk about the specific classes and how they differ in this world, and how being, in this kind of very aquatic setting is altered things. Lots of feats that are applicable to the races that have been presented, and again to the races that are more familiar to us, but are slightly different in this campaign setting. They talk about the gods of this world, which is always helpful. Not only can those be used in a campaign, this campaign, but you can always borrow them from another. And they talk about flying the skies, and there's a whole section in here which discusses how to design ships and how to do ship-to-ship combat, and how the environment can affect ships, and because if you're in an aerial world, weather is going to play a major part, not only because it affects you if you're on a ship or on a floating settlement of some variety, but it can move your settlement. So that may not be to your advantage. Your settlement could literally get blown across the world. The section on ships and combat and such is extensive. It's very in depth, and I think it's quite interesting and quite well done. They also have a section on specific magic items in the world. The specific hammer I mentioned in here that allows you to forge without a forged fire is in here. Then they talk about the different types of engines that the ships use, very reminiscent of Spelljammer. This very much has a Spelljammer vibe to me. It's just the ships are limited to world travel and not interdimensional travel. Now, speaking of ships, we have Ships of Skybourne, which is an entire supplement dedicated to the construction of ships, the crewing of ships, combat from ship to ship, all of it in even greater detail than the other book gives. And one of the things I really like about this is that the supplement gives you specific examples of not just airships, but every conceivable vehicle you would ever want to use in a campaign. From things simple as wagons and carriages to conventional rowboats and sailing ships of every size, from the most massive that have ever been used in our world, down to a little skiff. There's sand vehicles driven with sails on sand, and there's dwarven inventions in here like tanks, armored personnel carriers, essentially steam-powered expedition vehicles. There are dwarven mecha with big cannons on them. So all of these things can be used in any campaign, not just the setting here. There are submersibles. There's even one that's designed to go through lava, which really sounds like something right out of Jules Verne, doesn't it? And like really armored wagons. I mean, severely heavy war wagon. The Desert Behemoth, which again is a like a steam powered. The Great Drill, which gets you to the Hollow Earth, which is very cool. And then they also give lots of airships, of course, that goes without saying, but also some specific settlements, like they talk about the Elfwood and describe it in the terms that all the other conveyances are discussed, and specific ships of different organizations and individuals, and that could be used as models to create, PC vessels. Like for example, this little great floating tower. Isn't that awesome? So this is indispensable if you're going to run this campaign. But I also think it's really useful if you've ever wanted to have actual stats for a canoe. Yeah, that may not come up most of the time in a campaign, but sometimes it may. And now you have a book that you can refer to, and even if you don't use all the content, at least you have something to look at so that everybody's discussing the same thing. And I prefer to avoid inconsistencies. So if you have something like this as a reference, everyone can say, well, yeah, we like that. That's pretty cool, but we think it should be this or that. Okay, point of contention. You can change it for your campaign. But this is really cool. I was very impressed with the number of vehicles they covered, both generic designs and then specific individual vehicles that would be used in a campaign as by either PCs or NPCs, or could be discovered, or the Rex or something. You get the idea. So yeah, definitely high quality supplements here, and this is from Drop Dead Studios, and it's really well printed and bound. I was pleased with that. I have not. Sometimes I find that some books from smaller publishers can be inconsistent because the people they've hired to print their stuff don't do as good a job, but they did an excellent job with these. Okay, I've rambled on enough there. So I recommend the Skybourne setting. It's full of interesting stuff. You could really base a campaign on this without any difficulty, and it's got lots of things that could be transported into other campaigns as inspiration, or to fill gaps, or just to throw a monkey wrench at your players because they weren't expecting it. You may be living in a world where you like the idea of skyships, but you don't want spelljammers. Okay, yeah, spelljammers are a level higher because they can go between, worlds and things like that. But this brings that a little bit down. It's more steampunk, so that could be something that could be really useful. I've always really liked skyships. I think they're cool, and they fit into high fantasy campaigns, in my opinion. And having a campaign like this, where the campaign avoids traveling across the terrestrial environment of the planet, because it's now rife with this chaotic forest populated by who knows what that is being mutated and changed in this incredible flux of magical energy, is very cool. Now, the one thing I found in here that I didn't like a whole lot, and it confused me, was the dwarves. Like the aquatic races that essentially are not affected by the forest, except for the fact that the planar connections are now more difficult to achieve. Not impossible, you can still get from place to place, it just doesn't have the ease that the walkways enabled. Why would the dwarves be bothered by this at all? In this setting, as it's presented, the dwarves are. The dwarves are as much refugees as anybody else. And to my mind, that makes no sense. I think the dwarves should have just kept rolling right along, their society being almost completely unaffected, just like the aquatic races, except for the fact that, again, the walkways are gone, so the interplanar travel is more difficult. So I think that the dwarves should be very powerful politically, having taken in refugees, probably on a much more limited scale, maybe taking the really wealthy ones and making a buck off of this. Maybe they're viewed as mercantile. They're being cold, hard. They're making a buck off the suffering of others. Maybe there's dwarves that just take in everybody. They're very kind-hearted, and politically they have a much more positive relationship with the world at large. So I think there's a lot of here that could be used for the dwarves, and I don't understand why they were affected by the forest as presented in this setting. I think it's weird. I think, again, like the aquatic races, I think the dwarves should have just kept going on with their life and pretty much not even noticing. It just doesn't affect them. So, have you ever looked at this supplement, of this setting? And if you have, tell me what you think. And if you ever looked at the spheres of power, tell me what you think about it, because I want to know, I want to get an opinion before I invest in picking up a copy. Thank you.